Welcome to the 8th episode of Accessibility Now, stories about accessibility in the state of Georgia. Accessibility Now is a podcast produced by the statewide Independent Living Council of Georgia, and I'm your host, Matt Shebb. Today we're featuring a conversation with Dr. Sue ElHessen, an educator and activist in California specializing in disability rights. We talked to her about the topic of ableism, a form of discrimination that many in our society are still largely unaware of. Dr. Sue has served on the California Commission on Disability Access for the state of California. She's taught at multiple universities, and she's also a member for the school board for the Bellflower Unified School District, among many other roles in education and advocacy. All right, here's my conversation with Dr. Sue.
So, Dr. Sue, thanks so much for being with us today. And can we just start off with you kind of giving us a little bit of an overview of your career in advocacy and education?
Okay, well, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me to be on your podcast. I'm a strong advocate of independent living centers and actually served on the governor's committee under Arnold Schwarzenegger for our state independent living council for about 4 years. I was also board president for our local independent living center in Downey, called Southern California Rehabilitation Services. So I have a history of independent living and really strong advocate in that area. But how I got started really, I have a background in industrial organizational psychology, and I later earned my doctorate in education from USC. And it was on human performance improvement. So I've always been interested in investing in the human capital. So when I worked at Northrop, which was before ADA, I really was able to identify a lot of the inequities in corporate America. So I had to really fight to have, and I use this joke for my ADA trainings when I go out, is that Northrop paid me to sit on the John for 2 hours because I couldn't get up because the seats were so low. So I laugh about that now, but at the time it was really a challenge. And when I had to go to my boss and say, you really got to fix the restroom for me, because what I was doing is I was waiting to use the restroom during my lunch break to come home. Luckily, I was like 20 minutes away, but still that was a commute to go and come to work and to use the restroom. So what happened was I went to him, and because Northrop is federal contracted with the Air Force, they fall under 504. So they had to, once I brought it to their attention, make it accessible. So I stayed there for almost 3.5 years. And then they asked for a voluntary layoff, and I was happy to go. I then went to Toyota Motor Credit Corporation and found even more inequities. And was there for just a little over a year. It was a challenge when I was there trying to, they were on the 3rd floor, and I remember they had a fire alarm, and I had to go down 3 flights of stairs. And I'm post-polio, by the way. I should have identified my disability. Although I wasn't really using a scooter, I was just walking with my cane. It was a challenge, and it was getting harder for me to handle that. And then the commute and the drive started to be more of a challenge. So what happened was I actually left. I just quit because I thought I couldn't handle this anymore. And it's funny because the Japanese management style was totally different. They didn't really have identification of people with disabilities as a culture. So it was very interesting being part of that from a management perspective. But anyway, I quit, and I just decided to go back to education because I thought it was a safe haven for people with disabilities, and would be less of a struggle. So I ended up going to Cerritos College, community college, and I ended up working in counseling. That's how I started getting more involved. So I earned my community college credential in counseling and teaching, and I was there for about 5 years before I went to Cal State Long Beach and worked with the workability program. But during that transition process, I got trained to be ADA windmills training. and actually became a consultant on ADA issues, and actually wanted to started my side business to educate employers. I thought, oh, I've worked in industry. I really want to make a difference here. I want employers to hire people with disabilities, but also to be accessible for people with disabilities. So I started that campaign and got more involved. And that's when I became appointed by Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, and now under the Independent Living Council, and learned a lot through Department of Rehab and other organizations on advocacy work. And that's why I feel it's so important, as I was mentioning to you earlier. When we don't advocate for ourselves or our children who may have disabilities, then we are leaving a huge gap in regards to having an inclusive society as a whole. I think when we stop to reevaluate the passing of the ADA in 1990, July of 1990 to today, in 2023, we've made little progress. Actually, COVID helped people with disabilities, especially people with impaired disabilities, to really work remotely. And actually, they saw an increase in hiring during COVID for people with disabilities to work from home. But other than that, we've really gone down. And actually, since now we're moving out of COVID, I'm finding a challenge to maintain some of my positions as a commissioner. I'm a commissioner for Janice Hahn for the LA County Public Social Service Commission, and also currently commissioner for the Governor Newsom on disability access. And I love the idea that I don't have to travel or go out and try to find someone to help me go to these meetings. It's a strain for me today at my current stage physically. And I wanted to still be engaged in what I'm doing and advocating and having a voice at the table in these commissions. So I'm having a challenge right now trying to see how we can create legislation to continue for people with disabilities or other impairments to continue to have a voice at the table without having to physically get to meetings if they couldn't, that we still have the venue of being able to do it via Zoom.
Absolutely.
So that's something that I'm not getting resistance from, but I'm not getting a lot of support. And I'm wondering, why. So one of the areas that I really feel is important, today is we still have medical facilities not accessible. It just floors me when I go to an office and there's not the high-low table to transfer to, or there isn't restrooms that you can use. So we still have a long way really having full inclusion under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And if we don't have young people stepping up to the plate and having their voices expressed where they are in their generation is different than where I am. And so their needs, their concerns, we have to be able to encourage them to have that voice.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that introduction. I think that sets the table really well for what Shelley really wanted me to talk with you about is ableism, this idea of ableism. And I know you've done advocacy in that area and education in that area, and you touched on a lot of those points there. But can you kind of just briefly sort of explain what that idea is, or what ableism is to people that might not be familiar with the term?
Right. So, you've heard the term sexism, which has to do in regards to discriminating against someone's sex or sexual harassment. You've heard of racism, where you look at ethnic and racial bias. But yet ableism has been shoved under the carpet, basically, or not even talked about. So ableism basically is a definition where there is subtle discrimination against a person with a disability. So ableism has not been discussed or even looked at because all these other, I want to say buzzwords or racism, sexism have dominated the media. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but I'm saying that we aren't having an equal voice. And that's ableism. That's when we're discriminated against in regards to whether it's employment, whether it's to inclusion to programs, whether it's to even once you're employed, not being recognized for promotion. So there's a long history of how ableism has been and is currently happening throughout different venues of our society. But yet no one's really looking at wanting to address it. There's so many areas where ableism continues to, I hate to say the word thrive, but it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there instances where maybe this happens where it's unconscious or
Sure. When people intentionally, or like you're saying, unintentionally, create discrimination, bias, exclusion on a person with a disability, just as they would a person who is of color.
Right. So, and obviously the onus of this needs to be on society to
Or leaders.
our leaders, right,
Yeah.
to lead. Coming back to the idea of people who do have disabilities who find themselves in this state where things aren't equal, what advice do you have for them in terms of self-advocacy or how to deal with ableism in the meantime until we do make a society that's more inclusive? And it's not fair, but here we are where people are in situations like the ones you've described, you found yourself in. What advice or guidance could you provide to people with disabilities who are finding themselves facing ableism?
Education and advocacy. I think that's the two main things is education and advocacy. Educate yourself about the areas, educate yourself about the ADA and how your rights are protected. And now currently we're having, because of the internet, 508 under ADA as far as full access for people to use the internet, whether it's for business or actually making businesses more accountable in regards to their websites too. So that's a big push, right now too. But I think most importantly, when we look at individuals with disabilities, is learning about what are your strengths, not only focusing on what you can't do, what you can do, and how you can bring your voice to a situation to not only support you, but then support others like you or who are from your same community, the disability community. So what can you do as an individual to make that happen? And when we're trying to remove any type of stereotyping or race or bias or discrimination, what do? Is that we try to educate people and we try to give them greater exposure to what it is that they need to become aware of for them to grow as an individual. The ADA is the second largest civil rights act passed, besides the Civil Rights Act passed in 1964. It should stand. It should stand as a law to be recognized and to be implemented. I mean, I just can't believe we're still not implemented. When we talk about ableism, what we're trying to bring to the conversation is that the discrimination is there, not to be ignored. But what can we do to make that shift for it to change? How can we make you feel more included? So my thing is that if, a person who to that nature digs in their heels and resistance, those are the ones that we need to really educate and support to have a mind shift. Because that type of behavior isn't serving the community as a whole. I shifted my mindset to being hurt or disappointed to a mindset of how can I serve for the greatest good of all concerned. how can this situation really make a change for others? And that's when I started thinking, we got to get legislation. It's an ongoing process, is to know yourself enough to be able to be strong in your convictions. And I think when people sense your power, they can't shut you down. And so that's what I think I'd like to share with others, is just owning your own power and then being able to share that with others. And that's what I'm trying to do. I sometimes wonder when I go through these hardships, it's like, what the heck? Why am I being single? But then I stop and I say, the old saying is that life is not doing to you, it's doing for you. So it's not like it's happening to me, it's happening for me. So if this is happening for me, I try to reframe it, because that's my psychology background coming in, to what is it that I need to do? So I quickly turn this around to making it an issue in education. So that's one thing I think that's important, is educating not only yourself and knowing who you are, but gaining your power so you can spread it out to others.
Beautiful. Knowing yourself and owning your power. That's a beautiful note to end on.
Yeah.
I love what you just threw in there too, about the obstacles can also be the source of some of that power. The obstacles that we don't know why we're going through them down the road can be assets to us in terms of helping us develop and know ourselves and know our power.
Right.
So, well,
connect with others. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Sue. It was really, really a pleasure to get to chat with you and hear about your work and your story. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Thank you. I appreciate it too. And anytime, I'll be happy to come back on and share other stories.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I might hold you to that then.
Thank you, Matt. It's so nice getting to know you.
Likewise.
And we'll end today's episode there. Thank you so much for listening to Accessibility Now. Accessibility Now is a podcast produced by the statewide Independent Living Council of Georgia. If you want to find out more about that organization, you can visit us at silcga.org. That's silcga.org. This is your host, Matt Shedd, and I just want to close by reminding you that a Georgia that includes everyone is better for all of us.